Rick Broering. Rick kind of has to join us the day after the college basketball season ends, but I know for you, Rick, that there's no sleeping ever in the college basketball calendar.
It is certainly not the offseason right now in the college basketball world if you're doing what I do, Nick. As you know, the transfer portal is alive and well.
So, Rick, let's start off with the national championship game. Obviously, you cover Xavier, so you're very familiar with UConn. What an incredible 2-year run from Dan Hurley, from where that program was when he took it over. Just talk a little bit about what UConn has been able to accomplish.
Well, it's also so impressive that he called his shot. We've now seen 700 other Division I head coaches try to do a cheap imitation of his "we're coming, you better get us now because we're coming," like he did 2 years ago. But when he originally did that, it was one of those moments where everyone was like, this dude's going to look like an idiot or it's going to turn into what it turned into. And he delivered on those lines in the biggest way possible. And Nick, it's funny because, you know, I've been looking through the way they've put together this UConn roster. I know I've been asked a few times about it, like, what is instructive here about what Dan Hurley and this UConn coaching staff has done in the new transfer portal and NIL era when it comes to putting together this roster. And I hate to tell fans this, but the conclusion I keep coming to is they're a blue blood that did blue blood things. They went and got top transfers out of the portal. They also recruited 3 extremely talented high school recruits that they developed themselves. 2 are sophomores this year, and 1 was a freshman in Stephen Castle. And then they blended that with a couple of older transfer guys who are really good. And that's the type of thing you can do when you're a blue blood program. Now, in addition to that, they were able to get all these really talented guys to play unselfishly, to play with a high IQ, to buy into a really complex system. So there are impressive things that the coaching staff did, but a lot of it comes down to the fact that they have really, really good players, and I'm not sure every other program can replicate that.
Nick brought it up earlier in the show, and I tend to agree, and I think social media would tend to agree as well. But obviously, the roster construction on this UConn team has been extremely impressive and obviously worked out for the better for them. But I'm not sure that Danny Hurley gets the credit that he deserves as an X's and O's coach as well. The sets that they run, the scouting reports, even, I mean, the attack that they had against Purdue last night, obviously allowing Zach Edey to do what he does, but shutting down pretty much everybody else. I think their next highest scorer had 12 and nobody else had more than 5. What I mean, from your perspective as a Xavier loyalist, what is it about Danny Hurley's system that works so well for that roster that he's compiled?
Craig, who is your team? Who do you follow?
Well, I grew up a Kentucky fan.
Okay, I knew it wasn't a Big East school because you said that Danny Hurley doesn't get credit for being X and O guy, and if you follow the Big East at all, it's all Big East fans talk about. Like, you would think Dan Hurley invented the sport of basketball the way people talk about his X's and O's. And I'm not saying he's not incredible because he is, but like last night I read an article in The Athletic where they were like acting like he invented how to call plays. He's like, he took a football system where he's like, you have the number of players on the court and what set they're in, and then you add in a couple of other terms onto it, and then it's like it builds on each other. Like, this was some insane concept. It's like, guys, I hate to tell you this, I've been calling NKU games for the last 4 years going to practice. That's the same thing NKU's been doing. Like, that's pretty standard stuff. Not every coach does it that way. They all have different looks, but like it's not anything that's too crazy in terms of like their actual X's and O's. But to your point, Craig, what he is so good at is, one, he's willing to run a ton of set plays. And to do that and still play with flow and pace and have your guys not become robots, I think is really difficult to do. I think you have to have really high IQ players and really unselfish players to run sets the way they do. And then I said this on my Musketeer Report message board last night. It's the hard part isn't getting the guys into the right spots and getting them to remember what play you're running. I mean, these guys practice so damn much throughout the course of the season. They all know the plays. The hard part is to get them to run all those plays, get the other team worried about them, get them confused, thinking this is coming. Oh, there's an elevator screen on this backside and all this stuff. And meanwhile, your players are good enough and smart enough to read and react out of that. If they see you doing something to try to take away the set that's coming, they can then make a play and exploit whatever weakness you're giving them. That's where UConn is really special, I think.
All right, Rick, I promise we'll have you on again, and not the first 2 topics won't be UConn, UK, and Arkansas. But when that news came across that Calipari was going to Arkansas, What was your reaction? Because I saw that and I was like, this has to be fake. This has to be a Twitter troll. I was like double checking the accounts. Like, that guy looks pretty legit. What was your thoughts on this?
So I promise you, I'm not trying to do some like name drop, I've got inside sources here thing. But one of my really good friends used to work in the UK athletic department, and he is still really close with two people who are inside. Now, they're not like on the basketball staff, but they are aware of big picture things that are going on. And he started texting me Sunday evening around maybe like 7 p.m. about like, hey, I know you're going to see some of this Cal to Arkansas stuff. I think it's legit. And I was like, what do you mean it's legit? And he's like, well, his friend who's inside the athletic department was telling him when they had dinner a couple weeks ago that like Cal's wife is super unhappy with the whole situation in Lexington and how uncomfortable it is. And that there has been other schools, not just Arkansas, that have already back-channeled him, and he's shown some interest. And obviously Matt Norlander reported that as long ago as February, when the Ohio State job first opened up, he had reached out and back-channeled to see what was going on with the Ohio State job. So I believe that was true as well. And sure enough, I mean, as the night continued to unfold, Nick, like it came so fast. And because you're a sports guy who's in the Twitterverse who loves to interact in these types of moments. That's an all-time college basketball night on social media. I mean, the fact that it happened so quickly, that it was late Sunday night, and you have like John Rothstein's in bed and people are all fired up because he's not talking about the big news that's going on. I mean, there are so many different things going on when this happened. It was a great college basketball night.
It was a great night. I think one of the things that, and you brought it up, one of the things that's interesting is the general take right now is that one of the reasons that Calipari is leaving is he has felt a lack of support, not only from the fans, but a little bit from the administration as well. Is that shocking to you to hear that a blue blood program like Kentucky and its fans, I guess specifically, aren't supporting a guy who's had 50 NBA players come through the program in 15 years, has won a national championship? Obviously, the last couple of years has not necessarily met expectations, but are the fans jumping a little quick here? What's your general take on the whole situation?
It's funny, Craig. I would say up until this season, I was fully on the sort of wavelength that you just laid out of like, UK fans are crazy. This is insane. It's John Calipari. He's been really good. Look at what he's bringing in. Look at the talent he's still getting you and all of that. This year changed that for me. At a certain point, it's like he had tried to change over the last few years his method of doing things. He had brought in more experienced players. He had gotten transfers. He had tried to go the shooter route, bringing in like 2 or 3 different mid-major shooters to boost his roster a few years ago. He did have the National Player of the Year with a big man in Oscar Tshiebwe. And then this year, he went to a more perimeter-oriented offense where they're shooting a lot of threes and playing smaller lineups at times. He's done the adjustments that the fan base have asked for over the last few years, and none of it worked. They kept flaming out. And then that's not to say they didn't have some good wins and they weren't talented. They weren't ranked highly at times. But at Kentucky, I mean, think back. We're basically talking about right before the beginning of COVID, this downturn where they've really struggled. Since then, every other blue blood program has had a Final Four except for Kentucky. So it's not like we're past the point of like, well, you guys are just being ridiculous. You're over the top. You have too high of expectations. It's like, no, if you're a blue blood program, this is what that looks like. Getting to the Final Four is a fairly regular occurrence. Making Elite Eights should be a thing that happens for you. I mean, look at Duke this year. No one thought they were good. Everyone's thinking, oh, is John Shire really the right guy? Is he going to be the guy to come in after Coach K and keep this thing rolling? Duke made an Elite Eight in a down year this year. And it didn't really seem like a big deal. I mean, like, it's not unreasonable at this point for UK fans to be expecting more. And my point at the end of the day with Cal and that decision, I was shocked that Mitch Barnhart wanted to bring him back, because what was going to change between this year and next year? Great. You have a bunch of talented kids coming in. So what? You've had that every year. He's had great rosters.
One of the knocks against John Calipari, really for his entire tenure, has been that he's very stubborn. Right? He does it his way, and that's the way he's going to do it, and that's not going to change. You saw it even this year a little bit, even with the way that his starting lineup was constructed. You have a guy like Reed Shepherd, who's expected to be a lottery draft pick, who's coming off your bench because you refuse to make changes, or you overpromise something to a player in order to get him to come to your program, or whatever it may have been. He refuses to really hit the transfer portal hard. He goes after a lot of the one and dones, as we've talked about. that's not likely to change at Arkansas based on what we've seen out of John Calipari for the last 15 plus years. What's a realistic expectation for the Arkansas program when we revisit this move from him in 1, 3, and 5 years?
That's a really good question, Craig. And the answer to that is we don't know, but I would be optimistic if I was an Arkansas fan, and I'll tell you why. I think Cal's stubbornness, or the big issues he had that made him seem so stubborn late, was more to do with some weird mental spat that he got into with like the fan base and everyone in Lexington. To your point about him being stubborn, it kind of became this thing of like, you guys think I have to do things your way? Well, watch this. Watch how I'm going to do it. And he would literally say those words. He would win a game. Like, go back and watch the press conference after they won at at Auburn this year. Afterwards, he was like, I mean, honestly, it was like he was on drugs or something. It was insane to listen to. And he's like, see, did you see what I did there? You guys, well, we're all ready for us to lose. And I did this. I figured it out. My team was doing it the right way all along. You guys were the stupid ones. This essentially was kind of his vibe in that press conference. And I think like that's the place he got to, whereas everything was a fight against the UK administration, the UK boosters, the UK fan base. When he first got there, it wasn't that way. He was like the best politician you've ever seen. He was the guy going into the local coffee shop in like Cynthiana, Kentucky, and drinking a cup of coffee with a bunch of 90-year-olds and having a donut and talking about UK basketball and the glory days and like that type of stuff. I think he will get back to being Cal, being the guy that made UK the cool program, the guy that had Drake around, the guy that originally brought UK to the forefront of college basketball for that first decade that he was there. I think you're going to get a more similar version to that version of Cal around at Arkansas now, because I think the toxicity that had occurred and taken place over time at Kentucky with those relationships is gone now. And he's probably relieved to be away from that just as much as the Kentucky people are.
I think it's going to be great for the sport, though. I tell you what, UK, Arkansas, this is what college basketball needs. This is the best form of the sport.
You're not kidding, Nick. I mean, this is so great. It's great theater. It's great storylines now for the offseason to keep us going. And then when the season starts back up next year, I mean, what incredible storylines that we have. Not only does the premier program in college basketball have a new head coach, but also, I mean, John Calipari trying to figure things out in Arkansas is going to be an incredible storyline to follow in the SEC.
And they're going to be compared literally every day. What's Arkansas doing? What's Kentucky doing for years to come? That'll be fun. I want to ask you about UK's next coach and who you think might be some of the names to look for. But before I get to that, Rick, I need you to be honest with me. As a guy who loves the Horizon League, how satisfying was it to see the Oakland Grizzlies be the death blow to John Calipari?
Well, you know, it was funny because I totally had that take wrong. I said, we did a preview podcast with Richard Skinner beforehand, and I said that I thought Jack Golke could really be a problem for UK with the way they defend, that he could go off and have a big night shooting. And I said, even with that though, like, I think UK is going to win by double digits and they'll easily cover the spread. I think there's a great matchup for Kentucky. Like, Oakland's best player, the player of the year in the Horizon League, was a 6'6" non-shooting power forward, and UK has all this size and length and athleticism underneath the basket. It's like at some point they're going to be able to take away Trey Townsend, if nothing else. And they did okay against Trey Townsend. He had a decent game. It wasn't anything spectacular, but Jack Golke coming out with that flamethrower and putting 10 threes on him and them not being able to figure out how to take that away was incredible to watch. But I got it wrong. I'll say that. I did not see Oakland coming in there and pulling that upset at all.
Well, and I think we both can agree that it couldn't have happened. Oh, I think we both can agree that it couldn't happen to a better guy with Greg Kampe. I mean, as someone who worked in the Horizon League and obviously yourself knowing the Horizon League so well with your ties to Northern Kentucky, I mean, the man is so well respected across the entire league, and I think across the entire country, not only for his coaching abilities and his loyalty to Oakland, but just who he is as a person as well.
You got to give him a lot of credit. And I think this is kind of cool because in some way it validates the basketball side of things for Greg Kampe. Because like you said, all these people talk about how great he is, how special of a coach he is, how he's been there for 40 years. But you kind of get the sense that it's sort of like when everyone talks about how great of a guy someone is, it's like, he's such a great guy. It's like, well, you like that because you beat him all the time, right? Like, I mean, like with Greg Campy, it's like, he's such a great coach. Yeah, is he? Because he's never won a Horizon League tournament since he's joined. Like, he's had the best team multiple times. They've never won it. And it just, like, I don't know. And this year he finally made it. And not only did he make it, but he capitalized on the opportunity, pulled the big upset over Kentucky. And the whole world got to see what a character Greg Campy is. Just a real quick story I'll tell you. My first year of calling games at NKU, he's out there at midcourt before the tip-off talking to the officials before NKU's game against Oakland, and he says, "Sorry if my breath smells like onions. I just downed a couple of cheese conies before I came out here." I mean, this is before tip-off of the game, and he had just downed 3 cheese conies, according to him, in the locker room. You don't get a lot of guys like Greg Campy. It's great to see someone like him succeed.
He's the best. He's the best. All right, let's go on to the topic that Nick mentioned, the Kentucky men's basketball head coaching search. Assuming that all of this goes down with Calipari as expected later today, Nick and I seem to be on the same page that your first, second, third, fourth, fifth call have to be to Dan Hurley to try and get him to come. Let's make the assumption that Dan doesn't take the job. Who are the other names on your list for this job that you think will be contacted? And then give us a dark horse of someone that maybe people aren't thinking about that you think would be a good fit.
Dan Hurley, I agree with you. It's like the name that make him say no, at least. I mean, I don't think there's any chance you're getting him. He just won another national title. And obviously, if you've listened to his comments last night, and his wife doesn't want to live in Lexington or whatever. So that's great. I believe him on that. I don't think he's just trying to get a bigger paycheck out of Kentucky. I really don't think he will end up there. Billy Donovan is the other name that a lot of people are throwing out there that seems like would be a really good get for Kentucky. The problem with Billy Donovan, and there had been some rumors that he might be interested this time around. Obviously, he had turned them down 2 times before when they hired Billy Clyde Gillespie, and then when they hired Cal, they wanted Donovan both of those times, and he said no. Rumors that he might be interested this time, but I think the problem there is the Bulls are trying to work their way into that play-in game and the playoffs still right now. Kentucky can't wait for a coach. Like, the transfer portal's humming. They can't wait to figure out what's going to happen with the rest of the Bull season and then see if Billy Donovan says yes or not. So I just don't know that the timing is going to work out with Billy Donovan. And so then that gets you into, I think, kind of the Nate Oates portion of the program. Obviously, he came out yesterday and said that he's not going anywhere. So I feel like that's pretty legit too. We can cross him off the list. After that, it starts getting a bit more interesting. I think there are still some names out there that everyone's excited about as UK fans, but I think you also start hearing some more names like a Bruce Pearl and a Sean Miller and like some of the other names where you're going to have UK fans not as excited about or have more questions about, or they're going to be more of a split decision there. Quite honestly, I'm curious to see where this goes over the next 24 hours because it feels like we're still in that stage of everyone's posturing and we don't really know who the real candidates are. I think we'll have a much better feel for that in, like I said, 24 to 48 hours where we kind of get through this portion of everyone's putting out their social media statement saying that they're not going to be taking the job. One real dark horse name here that I'll throw out to you, and I don't think this guy will be a candidate at all, but one that like I keep hearing everyone talk about, Nate Oates, and it's Kentucky fans are really excited about analytics, and Nate Oates is popular for the analytics because he's good at math and he realizes that 3-pointers are worth more than 2, and so he lets his team shoot a lot of them. And I think UK fans really like the idea of that because Cal has been so against analytics and shooting a lot of threes. What about Micah Shrewsbury at Notre Dame? Had good success for a couple years at Penn State. He's a very analytical guy. His team shot a ton of threes. They're like top 7 or 8 in the country in threes attempted his second year at Penn State when they were really good and went to the tournament. And now he's been at Notre Dame for a year. I don't know what like the contract situation or buyout situation is there, but if it's affordable enough, if you're really hard pressed for that analytical guy and a guy that would win the press conference and be really engaging and easy to deal with and kind of be a nice soft landing spot after having the rough ending with Cal, I think that might be an interesting name to look at. Again, I don't think he'll be brought up, but I think it's kind of like the poor man's Nate Oates here, maybe if you feel like you can't get Nate Oates.
All right, Rick, I asked you to come on for a couple minutes, and we've been going for a while, so I appreciate your time. I got to ask you about Xavier's offseason. Obviously, they've lost a lot of guys already. Not sure most Xavier fans are necessarily too upset about the turnover because it felt like this team needed it. What's kind of your overall, take on this offseason and how Sean Miller can get Xavier back next season?
Yeah, no concerns about any of the individual guys that have left the program so far. To your point, I don't think any of them were being counted on as big-time contributors next year necessarily. And if they were, then there was some concerns about that probably. So the more interesting thing is that all of them left, and all of the front court players left pretty much right away. So you just have a lot of pieces that you have to fill. That's not to say you can't pretty much get the same or better than you had last year, but you got to do better than last year because last year wasn't nearly good enough. So trying to fill all those pieces and then on top of that, bring in better talent, that's going to be a real challenge for the coaching staff in the transfer portal over the next few days or next few weeks. Obviously, they added Furman transfer Marcus Foster's 6'4", 200 pounds, really long arms, kind of an interesting combination of a guy who can shoot the ball, run off screens and catch and shoot, but then also go inside and rebound with his long arms and his strength. So I think that's one theme that you're going to continue to see as Xavier navigates the transfer portal. Sean Miller and this coaching staff really want to upgrade the toughness and physicality of this team compared to last year's. They just were not physically where he needed them to be.
It's a great point. You're obviously extremely tied into Northern Kentucky. A guy like Marcus Warwick, has become the Horizon League's all-time leader in career points scored. He's from Lexington, right in Kentucky's backyard, a guy that Kentucky hasn't, didn't look at. But the way Cal has recruited certainly kind of missed some of those homegrown opportunities. Kentucky is known as a really good high school basketball state. Do you expect that to change with the new head coach?
Obviously, that will completely depend on who that coach is, right? I mean, some coaches feel that it's more of a big deal to recruit the surrounding area around their school. I personally don't buy into that at all. I think that's a good way to get fired, is like getting too caught up in having to land local kids that mean something to the community. It's like they won't care. If you lose with the local kids, they'll hate you and the local kid just as much. It does not matter where they're from, just win the games. And to that point, I don't know that Kentucky is usually flushed with a lot of talent that's right for Kentucky's level. So I don't know if that's going to be a big concern of the next head coach, but I do think it's possible you'll see a guy who makes it more of a point to go after some of the local guys. And I think even like when Cal first started, you saw him bring in a guy like a Dominique Hawkins to the bench. And like he wasn't necessarily a highly thought of prospect, but he saw him play well at the state tournament, brought him into the end of the bench, and then he had a nice role over the course of his career. So even Cal kind of did that a little bit earlier on in his career, and then I think he kind of quit caring about what people thought. I imagine you'll see a little bit more of that with the new head coach, yeah.
All right, Rick, we'll end it with this. Give us your next head coach at Kentucky.
Man, I mean, do we know for sure? I saw some rumors on social media. Has Scott Drew turned it down for sure or not?
I haven't seen that.
Okay, I have not seen that Scott Drew has turned it down yet. I don't know if we're going to hear that today or not, but if Scott Drew has not turned it down yet, that is the guy that I think, and that's the guy I've always thought was the most likely big name candidate out there. There's always been this rumor ever since the COVID bubble that happened that Mitch Barnhart and Scott Drew really hit it off there and have become like good friends. And also there might be like some type of religious connection between them or something out. And they're both big Christian guys, I guess. So I don't know. Maybe that'll be Scott Drew. I'll go with Scott Drew as my pick.
All right, Rick, really appreciate your time. Always the best college basketball insight. Sure to check out Rick at musketeerreport.com. Do incredible work over there. Thanks a lot, Rick.
Nick, thank you. Enjoying your Reds coverage as always, man. Keep it up.